My brother made my life hell, then got my wife pregnant. Now he wants my help after our parents disowned him and left me their $2 million inheritance. My younger brother David has always harbored a deep-seated resentment toward me. If you think it stemmed from jealousy, you'd be wrong. He was the favored child, not me. Our mother always indulged David. She cooked his meals, did his laundry, and even asked me to help him with his schoolwork. I was expected to assist him simply because we were family, but I never received the same consideration. I was independent, and maybe it was partly my fault for always meeting his needs without expecting anything in return. He never helped me when I needed it and only approached me when he wanted something. While I was a quiet, introverted kid who enjoyed studying and keeping to myself, he was loud and rough, just like our dad. I'm straightforward and honest, never sugarcoating things, and I think my mother developed a negative perception of me because of that. This favoritism made David the family's darling, which I tolerated while we were growing up, but problems began when he started bullying and mocking me for being different. He teased me about my height and my glasses, snuck into my room to read my diary, then tattled to my mom about what I'd written. When I yelled at him and complained to our parents about him invading my privacy, they laughed it off as no big deal. He did worse things, nearly breaking my glasses and putting nasty things in my food. He once put little stones in my cereal. Luckily, I found them before they damaged my teeth. When I told my mom, she dismissed it. This is how brothers bond. Whenever we fought, David zeroed in on my insecurities. We went to the same school, and instead of supporting me when I was bullied, he sided with the bullies, calling me ugly loser and hairy monkey, even encouraging them to hurt me and calling me a failure. During one fight over something trivial I can't even remember, he told me to kill myself. Most insults I could brush off, but that one cut deep because I was struggling with my mental health at the time. I'm doing better now, but hearing my own brother say that was devastating. Dad was often at work and Mom didn't care much. She even scolded me once, claiming it was my fault for irritating him. Things got worse in high school. David once tried to set my hair on fire, and unbelievably, our mother defended him, saying he was just playing. Thankfully, my dad finally sided with me, recognized the gravity of the situation, and threatened to call the police on David. It shocked David. He'd never faced consequences. Dad made it clear that enough was enough and that David needed to respect his older brother. Later, Dad came to my room and talked. I never expected his support because he always told David how similar they were, which was true. But he admitted he'd waited years hoping David would mature and was realizing David was becoming a bully. Hearing that was validating. I told him everything David had done and about the bullying at school. Dad was shocked at how much I'd endured. The next day he spoke to the principal, and the bullies were warned about severe consequences. That evening, Dad enrolled me in MMA at our local gym, telling me to stand up to bullies. A nerdy kid learning to fight might have seemed laughable, but I was focused. I balanced studies and workouts, and MMA changed my life and physique. One day, David stole my pocket money from chores. I caught him as he was about to cycle off with friends. When I demanded it back, he mocked me and said all I could do was run to Daddy. I snapped and punched him in the face. He fell back. I took my money from his pocket and tossed him down again. He cried loudly, which was almost comical. Mom rushed out, learned I'd fought him, and reprimanded me, saying I should be a better role model. She complained to Dad that I needed to be controlled. Dad grimly asked both of us to explain. I told him David had stolen the money I'd worked hard to save. David said he needed it for a date and that, as his brother, I should help him. Dad told David he was lucky I only punched him because anyone else would have called the police, and that he had no right to take other people's things. David threw a tantrum, hoping Mom would side with him, but Dad remained firm. When David saw he wouldn't get me punished, he screamed that he hated me and locked himself in his room. After that, David distanced himself. He understood he couldn't bully me physically anymore and that even Dad had stopped enabling him. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we were equals. He still insulted me verbally when our parents weren't around, growing angrier and more short-tempered with age. He'd ignore me, mutter nerd or loser, and relay messages through our mother instead of speaking to me. When I asked why he couldn't just talk to me, she urged me to be more understanding. I couldn't tell if it was puberty or genuine hatred, but dealing with his comments became unbearable, and I longed to move out. I asked Mom repeatedly to mediate a conversation so we could resolve things, but she always refused. Eventually, I left for my dream university on a scholarship as a top student. Dad threw me a party. Even Mom seemed proud. David remained aloof, barely acknowledging my achievements. Leaving was a mix of excitement and relief to escape the toxic environment. The first months at university were liberating, new friends, classes, and distance from David's shadow. In my second year, I met my wife, Karen, at a frat party through a friend. We clicked immediately. Coming from a religious background, having kids outside marriage was frowned upon, but when she got pregnant in our final year, We decided to marry right after graduation. Our wedding was small but joyful. Our parents were happy for us. I believed Karen was the love of my life. I'd always envisioned monogamy, one woman to come home to. Despite other women showing interest over the years, I never pursued anything. I was content in my marriage. But I later uncovered 2 incidents of infidelity, an intermittent affair with her married Kyo worker that spanned several years, and a brief fling with an ex-boyfriend during a visit to her family. Looking back, maybe I was naive. Each time we separated for a while, I chose to forgive. I didn't want to raise a child in a broken home and believed we could overcome it. The CO worker affair happened when we were young. I chalked it up to youthful mistakes. For a period, things improved, though trust never fully returned. I did my best to set aside doubts, knowing that if I forgave, I had to work toward a fresh start. It had been 4 years since her second betrayal, and I felt confident in giving her another chance. Karen seemed to have changed. We were happy, planning our future. Then 3 months ago, my world shattered when she revealed she'd been having a long-term affair and suggested our son might not be mine. Her words hit like a ton of bricks. Shock, betrayal, disbelief. I asked why she'd kept such a secret, how she could do something so devastating. Her reaction was cold and indifferent, as if detached from the pain she caused. Her vague responses left me with more questions than answers. I pressed for the truth. I deserved to know the father of the child I'd raised since birth. Ultimately, she admitted it was David. My eyes widened. She explained she and David had become friends when I introduced her to my family, and she stayed with us from Thanksgiving until New Year's. David, usually cold to me, was warm and polite to her, which made me glad. I didn't want her to feel unwelcome. She wanted to be accepted, so she spent time with my mom. She noticed the rift between David and me. I explained it might never be repaired. She started including David in our outings, hoping we'd bond. Whenever we planned to watch a movie, she invited David, and we watched what he chose. David and I exchanged a few words, an improvement over silence. I remember Karen and David hanging out and playing video games. I thought nothing of it. Karen told me that one day David opened up about a breakup. Feeling vulnerable, he struck up a friendship with her. He started to flirt when I wasn't around. Eventually, things escalated. The vision of my wife and brother together made me sick. Karen said she felt guilty afterward and left him, which matched her abrupt decision to go home, instead of spending New Year's with me. I tried to convince her to stay, but she insisted on leaving. When we met back at college after the holidays, she was her usual cheerful self, so I didn't question it. 2 weeks later, we found out she was pregnant. She admitted she didn't know if the child was mine or David's, and with no way to prove it then, she chose to stay with me, knowing I was the more dependable brother. That's why we got married. My world felt like it was crashing down. The son I loved might not be mine. I asked if she'd been sleeping with David recently. She nodded. They'd always stayed in touch because their chemistry was undeniable. They snuck off to hotels, lying to me about working overtime. Half her business trips were romantic getaways with him. I asked why she married me if she wanted my brother. She said she didn't want to be the one to break off the marriage. She saw me as a wonderful father and decided to stay. She said she made a mistake and didn't know when to stop. I told her I appreciated the truth, but I was packing and leaving. She cried, begged for forgiveness, expected me to yell. Instead, I calmly packed. She insisted that if I loved her, I should fight for her, that mistakes happen in every marriage. When she realized I wasn't going to do anything, she said our son would be affected by a divorce, and that children shouldn't be raised in broken homes. I reminded her I might not even be the father. She cried more and accused me of being cruel. It seemed she believed nothing could make me leave. Perhaps it was partly my fault for letting things slide before. I did love her, but it felt tied to thinking we had a son together and to the years since college. She insisted it wasn't too late to fix things, but I had no patience left. Trust was gone. Her words felt hollow. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget she slept with my brother. I left her crying on the doorstep and checked into a hotel. The next day, I told my parents everything about the affair. My mother initially tried to defend David. Her boy could never do such a thing. Determined to expose the truth, I asked them to stay silent while I called David on speaker so I could catch him off guard. At first, he denied everything, but when I told him Karen had admitted it, he blamed her, calling her characterless, saying it wasn't his fault if women were attracted to him and that he was the better-looking brother. I told him I'd expose him to everyone. He mocked me, saying no one would believe me because he was the golden child. I thanked him for confirming the truth, knowing our parents had heard everything. He went quiet, then spluttered, trying to salvage his image. My mother, shocked, demanded an explanation. He stuttered through excuses, blaming everyone else and trying to shift blame to Karen. I saw disappointment and anger on my mother's face. My father, usually reserved, couldn't contain his disappointment. He took the phone and told David that what he'd done wasn't just a betrayal of me, but of the family, that he'd shattered our trust and defied everything he'd tried to teach us. He said we were partly to blame for what David had become, but would no longer tolerate it. From that day, David was cut off from the college funds and from financial support. "Let's see how you manage without my money," Dad said. I maintained composure, though I'd wanted to scream. Watching Dad hold him accountable was vindicating. My mother tried to justify David, but Dad ended the call. Afterward, Mom hugged me, our first real embrace in a long time, and apologized for not believing me. Dad helped me find a good lawyer to divorce Karen. She and her lawyer tried to fight dirty, asking for alimony since I earned more, but her affair weighed heavily in my favor. We did a paternity test. It confirmed David was the father. That news was even more painful than discovering the infidelity. I was furious that the son I had loved and raised wasn't mine. Karen begged me to keep visiting him, arguing he shouldn't be punished, but I couldn't bear to see him. He reminded me too much of David. After the divorce was finalized, I felt free. I moved into a bachelor pad, and having married young, it felt surreal to live alone, but my independent nature helped me adapt quickly, and I enjoyed it. 2 weeks ago, Dad called to say he was changing his will. He didn't want to leave anything to David. Dad is stubborn. Once he cut David off, he stuck to it. David tried to reach our parents, even showed up at their doorstep begging for forgiveness, but they refused to let him in. Even my mother, who usually caved to his tantrums, seemed done. David never texted me to apologize. He didn't regret what he'd done. He just regretted the consequences. Dad said he planned to leave everything to me and only $1 to David. Dad had worked hard his entire life with assets, retirement fund, and life insurance. It totaled nearly $2 million. The only condition was that if Dad died before Mom, she could continue living in their house, even though ownership would transfer to me, which I didn't mind. Somehow, David found out and, unable to reach our parents, called me to make amends. He said he was struggling with college and that after Karen discovered paternity, she'd been pestering him for child support. He said he had no money and couldn't find part-time work. He begged me to talk to the family so we could start fresh because he needed my help. I laughed and told him I was done. I reminded him he should have thought about the consequences before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. He argued I was being unfair, that Karen was also to blame. I agreed and reminded him I divorced her, making her his responsibility. He shouldn't call me to complain about her or the child. Those were the consequences of his own actions. He started to raise his voice, but I cut him off and reminded him he was no longer the favored child, but the black sheep who slept with his brother's wife. He began to cry, saying everyone, including grandparents and relatives, had turned against him. While that was true, it wasn't my concern. I told him we were done and that he should never call me again. I no longer considered him my brother. Since then, I've replayed the conversation in my mind. Despite my hatred for him, I hadn't heard him cry since we were kids. It hurt a little to hear him so helpless, so I'm here asking if I should talk to our parents about him, or if I'd be an if I don't. Update 1. Many of you asked why I'm no longer in contact with my son Henry and called me cruel. I'm not comfortable raising another man's child. This isn't a stepson situation. I was led to believe Henry was my son, only to learn he's my brother David's. It hurt deeply. I cried for days. The main reason I want no contact is that I no longer want Karen in my life. If I remain connected to her child, she'll find a way back into my life, and I need space. You may think I'm cruel or selfish, but I can't see him again, at least not for a very long time. Update 2. Most of you correctly guessed my mother informed David about Dad changing his will, which led David to call me as a last resort. I confronted her in front of Dad. She broke down, saying I'd punished David enough and he'd learned his lesson. Dad firmly told her that if she believed what David did was forgivable, he could no longer stay married to her because he could never forgive such a betrayal. That threat silenced her. Dad made it clear that if she ever talked with David again and we found out, she could pack her bags and leave. He's stubborn. Hopefully she learns. Update 3. 5 months later, my relationship with my parents has improved. Dad and I go golfing every weekend. He treats me more like a buddy than a son. Although my mother misses David, she has stayed away from him. The last I heard from a cousin is that David had been asking everyone for money and eventually dropped out of college because he couldn't afford the fees. He and Karen are living together. He has a part-time job as a mechanic. Apparently, they're raising Henry together, which is a good thing, I guess. I never discussed David with my parents, and they don't bring him up either. I'm doing well. I was promoted 2 months ago. My salary improved significantly, and I'm not dating. I still need time and space to heal. I've been going to therapy. We'll see how that works out.